Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all enjoying this beautiful weather on a Saturday morning. My name is Jason Gedijk, and I am the Adult Education Manager here at Brookside Gardens. Now, while my Montgomery Parks facilities are closed through the month of June, we at Brookside Gardens are focused on adapting our operations and program offerings to this new situation. I know a lot of you have turned towards the outdoors to stay healthy and manage stress. We understand the need to balance practicing safe social distancing policies with your desire to continue learning and gardening. And towards that end, we're offering 2 free lectures in May, today being the first of them, and 4 online programs in June. Brookside Gardens is also offering an online plant sale with carefully scheduled pickups from our visitor center near Wheaton, Maryland. We'll make sure to email you all with a list of these online programs and a link to the online plant sale after this class. So welcome. Today's lecture is the first online program that we're hosting for the public. So I ask for your patience and understanding as we're all learning in this new online environment together. I wanted to take a minute to go over a few housekeeping items and helpful tips for navigating this online platform that you're all logged into and watching with me now live. I'll be stopping to answer questions throughout the presentation after each main topic. You can submit your questions at any time, and my colleague Brooke Rosen, who's also online right now helping to manage this platform with me, Brooke will submit them and then read the questions aloud during each question and answer break. We have almost 200 people joining us today online, so I will not be able to get to every question. If you'd like to submit a question, look on the right side of your screen and you'll see a question and answer or Q&A box. Click on the tab that says My Questions. Then you can type in your name or remain anonymous. Then below that, you can type in your question and submit it. Your question will then be reviewed, and if submitted, it will appear under the Featured tab. And that is just the left of the My Questions tab. Now, to look at all the questions being asked by other participants, click on the Featured tab and you can scroll through them there. If you want to view this lecture in full screen mode so you can get a really good close-up look at the pictures, click on the X button on the right side of the live event Q&A box, and it will close that Q&A column out. Then if you want to bring the Q&A box back up during the question and answer periods, you can click on the icon of a small box with a question mark in it. This is located at the top right of your screen, immediately next to the icon that says Leave. Okay, thank you so much for being patient during these housekeeping items. I hope that this will help you folks feel comfortable navigating the system. And again, I appreciate all of your patience and understanding as this is my first online lecture that I'm teaching. So thank you so much for being here with me. Let's dive down into the presentation itself. A little bit of background. The reason why I created this lecture was kind of in response to a personal journey as a gardener and a horticulturalist that I think a lot of you can probably relate to. When I purchased my home, it was the first time I had my own garden and I was able to enjoy it. So I went out to local nurseries, Home Depot, hardware stores, and I would find that one plant that spoke to me. Whether it was the flower or the foliage or whatever it was, I bought these one-off plants. So my backyard soon filled up with plants, and I eventually realized, looking at it, that I love each individual plant, but they represented a collection of species, a collection of one individual plants, instead of a carefully planned and curated landscape that was a consciously planned landscape design. So I realized, as a gardener, as someone who wants to get better at landscape design, how can we come up with these perfect plant combinations that make our garden a little bit more sense, that allow us to be more purposeful and consciously garden? Today, I'll be talking about design concepts that include color, texture, and shape. We'll be talking about the combination criteria that goes into thinking how you might want to mix and match your plants. And then we'll be doing a selection process, some examples of what looks good, but what can even look better by adding different types of combinations of plants. And then we'll get to the good stuff, which I know you folks want me to show, which is the plant combinations. And we'll be going over that from both shade gardens and sun gardens, and again, a focus on spring and summer. Now, please keep in mind these plant combinations are not exhaustive. I could go on for hours and hours. We could give you thousands of combinations. The big part of this class today is to ensure that you folks can walk away with it understanding how to create your own perfect plant combinations. I'm not going to be there with you folks in your gardens, at your nursery center to help advise you. So you're going to become the expert, hopefully, after this lecture. How do we define a perfect plant marriage? Well, you can look at it in two options. You either want to create a single pair, you have a favorite dahlia that you want to pair with another beautiful plant, or you have these larger groupings of plants, which takes a little bit more care and conscientious planning to ensure that you get it right. Now, this perfect marriage can be focal plants that draw the attention in a garden, or you can use these perfect marriages to create cohesion and unity in garden design, which we'll go through. Again, when you're looking at a plant marriage, at a combination of plants, do you want to use that combination to contrast the different features, or do you want to use that plant combination to complement the features? And we'll also go into that as well. Now, it's important when you're going through this process again, and we're going to talk about this, color, texture, shape, and form make up the core foundation of landscape design and how you folks should look at a plant and understand how you want to make that even better by combining it with another plant. Now, color really does perfect that union. It is the primary factor that we notice in plant combinations. For those of you who are by a window, look outside right now, maybe find that one thing in the garden that pops out at you. Why does it pop out at you? Is it the color? Is it the texture? Is it the form? Is it the foliage? Now, color can also be utilized to further secure the tone of the garden. This can be colors that feel more formal, colors that feel more casual and informal, and we'll go into that a little bit more. And again, color is vital in tying areas of the garden together to create unity. And also, lastly, focal points. Color can be used to draw attention to a specific area of the garden. Now, for those of you watching online, do you see this red dot? That's essentially my laser pointer that I've turned my arrow into. So I'm going to be using this throughout the presentation to essentially point things out and show you. Now, here's a great example. And if we were in a class, I'd ask you, how many of you know where this is? But of course, I can't see you. So assuming if you've been to Brookside Gardens, you'll know this is our rose garden. This is our beautiful wisteria arbor. So you see here how the pop of beautiful bright lilac and purple colors going down the middle draws your eye towards a line. It forms a direction. Now, this is the exact same garden, the rose garden, but later, probably end of May, early June. And if you notice here where my red pointer is, that is the wisteria arbor, but it's all the flowers are gone. It's just a mass of leaves and it disappears. So again, this is just a great example that color does change even just by a month, and a focal point changes even just by a month in the garden. This is also a great example of when you're standing from this viewpoint, you have a wonderful flow of the eye that goes from down here and curves around to the left with a bed of roses. So again, color is powerful. You can do a lot with it, and you should always use it consciously. So color really helps set up balance in gardens. You can be more formal and use it to set up a symmetrical garden, or if you want perhaps a more casual garden, you can have a stronger color on the left and have a different color on the right, or a different sort of mass groupings of size of color. Color is great for setting up rhythm. It is how the eye perceives the garden. It's a formal repetition or a natural flow. Now, one important thing that I think a lot of times gardeners, when they go to the nurseries, they're instantly wowed and jazzed by looking at the flowers that are in bloom. Don't limit your color choices or your plant choices just to flowers. Again, foliage is key, especially in a shade garden that we'll go through. Bark is also key to looking at the color and the texture that can be just as interesting as a beautiful flower. So again, we'll go through this, but don't limit yourself just to flowers. And again, lastly, personal preference is key. My favorite color is purple. Some people really do not like that in a landscape. Again, it's all up to you what makes you happy as a gardener, because you're the one that has to live with your garden and look at it every day. So here is a picture of the Enid Haupt Garden behind the Smithsonian Castle on the National Mall here in Washington, D.C. I'm sure a lot of you folks have seen this. Now, this is a well-known design because it is symmetrical, perfectly symmetrical. And the gardener there takes great care at making sure that everything is perfect. So you see on the right and the left, there's a balance, not only in symmetrical shapes, the diamonds there in the middle, but on the right and the left, a perfect balance of color, a perfect balance of plantings. So this leads you to a very sort of pleasing, formal, structured view. Now this is a garden in Holland. It's called Keukenhof. It is the world's largest tulip and bulb garden. It is absolutely beautiful in springtime. Here, as you see, this is not a formal structure. This is not completely symmetrical, but there is a balance of color on the right and the left. And as you see, they've geniusly used these beautiful blue bulbs here and peppered them throughout the garden so that when you're standing there at the forefront of the garden, your eye naturally follows a waving pathway, follows this pathway as you walk, so that there's always a continuity in the line of sight. Now, a lot of you probably recognize this, the color wheel, probably from art class in high school or so, but it's essential that we kind of go over this quickly for you folks. Now, on the right side, there are warm colors. On the left side, there are cool colors. The warm colors are yellow, the oranges, and the reds. And the cool colors are the blues and the purples. Silvers are considered cool colors. Sometimes browns are also considered cool colors. It's important to recognize whether these colors are cool or warm because they are going to be your best friends in the landscape doing landscape design and planning. They can impact your garden in very specific ways, and that's what we're going to go through right now. So warm colors, they can stimulate, they can enliven the senses. If you're outside in the summer and you're seeing a beautiful garden with bright red and orange and yellow flowers, it makes you feel alive. It also makes you just feel warm. Colors can also change the perceived size of a space. Now it's interesting because warm colors really jump out at you. They're very bold. Your eyesight sees them immediately. So therefore they make a space seem smaller and more intimate. So if you have a large garden, you can use a lot of these bright, beautiful, warm colors and plant them to make the space feel more intimate. The colors pop out and will make it seem a little bit smaller. Now, cool colors, on the other hand, obviously, are the blues, the purples, the whites, the silvers. These colors, again, can change the way that we perceive the size of a space. You want to use cool colors to increase the size of a space. Again, cool colors disappear into the landscape typically. They don't pop out. So you're going to have your eye naturally looking for them, and it's going to make you feel as if you're in a larger space when you have a garden with cool colors. So if you have a small garden, you want to make it feel a little bit larger, consider using cool colors. Now again, neutral colors, white is again sometimes considered a cool color, but I think it's more of a neutral color. You have the black, the grays, the silvers, and the shades of brown. They're often used in the landscape as kind of a canvas. Imagine them as a canvas at the back because they have sort of a neutral color, and you can paint on that canvas using a variety of other colors. They really help tie spaces together between these color blocks as you see here. Now, greens and whites tend to be formal in a formal garden setting. So again, color changes the mood as well. Now, if you have a garden that is viewed at nighttime, you have outdoor parties, you like sitting out there at dusk, remember that certain colors will stand out more in a garden at night versus the daytime. So neutral colors and warm colors stand out in low light, whereas cooler colors Again, the silvers, the blues and the purples, they really disappear into a garden. So again, think of when you're viewing your garden and then use color appropriately. Here's a great example of looking at a sort of more shadier garden. You have these beautiful white, might be impatiens on the bottom of that garden space that really pop out. Now I highlighted here, you see the cool color. This is some sort of bulb type flower that has these beautiful light lilac flowers on it. It disappears. Comparative to the white flowers, it disappears. And in the bottom left here, you can even see some type of orange flower there that even that pops out more as a warm color than that cool color. So I use this as an example where cool colors and shade gardens disappear and you're losing their effectiveness. Now, I want to go over, are there any questions perhaps might just want to quickly stop and talk about? I want to make sure that you're all tracking, that you're all following along, and if Brooke, if you have any that you think are appropriate, feel free to read them out, or I can always continue.
I think people are still waking up a little bit. We do not have any questions quite yet. Great, and just remember, if you folks want to submit any of your own questions, go to the Q&A box, submit them. You can do it anonymously, or you can write in your name, submit them. Brooke will review those questions, and then she'll go ahead and post them, and then we can cover them if we have time. So moving on to monochromatic color schemes. They are ones that use just one color. They're typically done in the floral design trade, a little bit more sort of considered modern, more sophisticated. They use many different shades of the same color for variety and interest. They are harmonious, they create a cohesive visual effect, and it's minimalist in terms of you're only using one type of color, but it does require a little bit more of a sophisticated touch to make sure that you're getting it right, because again, the same colors, if you're not using the form and texture correctly, essentially they disappear into each other, right? And then nothing really stands out effectively. So here, let's go into just looking at a monochromatic color scheme. It is sort of more of a naturalistic looking color scheme. We have the drumstick allium, which are these beautiful kind of purple, dark round heads here. You have the salvia, which is these purple long spikes, and then you have the pennisetum, which is the white spikes, and then you have the acanthus, which is at the back there. So essentially various shades of purples and lilacs. It looks very effective. However, can you imagine if the salvia and the pennisetum are almost the exact same form and texture and shape? So you have to have a good variance of color there, which it does, right? And if, say, these dark purple drumstick alliums weren't so dark in color and that their shape and form weren't different than everything else around it, it would disappear itself as well. So moving on to another monochromatic design, here we have a Chinese onion, which is an Allium chinense, just those white fuzzy flowers behind, and then you have an echinacea as well. So similar shades with almost like a light pink, but what really makes this sort of stand out is because you have these dark cone heads, and again, the petals are a different shape and texture than the flowers around it. Here's another one, white cone flower with sedum autumn joy and stipa grass. So again, the variety of textures and shapes really stand out, but it is the same monochromatic color and feel. Here's another one. I know today we're talking just about perennials, but I wanted to throw in some really fun annuals to show you another example of a monochromatic garden design. You have these giant colocasia ears here, and you have these ornamental peppers, and you have these alternantheria, and then you have the beautiful pennisetum fountain grass. Again, we never recommend pennisetums unless you're using them as an annual because some of them can be very invasive. So these are just great examples of monochromatic color designs.
So there's a couple questions that I'm looking at the left, and we will certainly get into some of them as we go on. One of them is talking about companion planting and how to have plants based on seasons so you have a constant flow of blooms. So we'll get into that a little bit. But let me stay focused on complementary colors. Those are those colors that are opposite each other on the color wheel. So you look here, this is the oranges and the blues, the reds and the greens. It's why Christmas decorations are so bright and they really stand out because they're opposite of each other on the color wheel. So what they do is that they make each other color stand out. So if you have an orange and a yellow, it's not going to stand out as much as an orange and a purple. And they are used to create these visually exciting and dynamic designs in the garden space. If you want a pop of energy, a dynamic wow, you want to use complementary colors. Now, Impressionists like Vincent van Gogh and Paul Gauguin were masters of utilizing these complementary colors. And here's some examples. We have Liatris spicata, this tall, feathery purple plant, and then we have Asclepia with butterfly weed behind it. So it works because it's a different shape and form and texture, but really the complementary colors of orange and purple stand out, and that's what makes this so lively, so intense. And when you're looking at it, you feel that energy coming from those colors. Now, typically here's an example where if you had just say this kale right here, right, and you had some of these little ageratum picking out in the landscape, you don't really see it as much, but you see the kale because it's framed by the black-eyed Susans behind it. So again, if you have a sort of a neutral or darker color, you can certainly use this complementary color scheme to pop it and to really show this sort of excitement and to really highlight each other. Now, these are not garden designs that I would say are maybe as high-end. Everyone has their own personal taste. I'm showing them because they are complementary colors that pop. They stand out. You are using color as the main feature when you are creating a perfect plant marriage. Here you have coleus, the red and the green. Here you have the daylilies, and it looks like, I think, catmint, nepeta. And so the purple and the yellows really pop each other a lot in the landscape. And again, it's just personal taste, but use color consciously. Be very conscious of why you're using it and how. So harmonious. If you want to create a harmonious, eye-pleasing, peaceful garden, use analogous colors. They are basically similar colors next to each other in the color wheel. You have red and oranges, yellows and oranges, blues and purples. It creates harmony in the garden, and the reason why it feels so harmonious is that it's often found in nature. It's pleasing to the eye, it creates a calming effect. So you want to choose one color to dominate typically, and two others on either side to support. So let's just say you have red as the main plant, you might have a yellow and orange plant on either side. Here's a great example of a garden that uses this analogous color scheme. It's lively, you're using warm colors. Again, it feels really happy and warm to you, but it's pleasing to the eye. It's very, very smooth as well. Here's a great example of an analogous color scheme using cool colors. Again, pleasing to the eye, but gives you sort of more of a cooler feeling. Any other questions we might want to stop and ask right now?
Jason, again, I think we've got some great questions coming in, but I think they're things that you'll start to hit on a little later in your presentation. Like Anonymous said, what might be complementary to bee balm?
We actually have that as one of the plant combinations that we're going to go through towards the end. It's so fun to watch out all these questions because I know you're here to get the good juice, which is the plant combinations. We are absolutely going to dig down into that. But again, I want to equip you folks so that you can go out and figure out what looks good together. And then also, of course, what works in the landscape from a cultural requirements, which are, of course, the light conditions, the soil conditions, the moisture conditions, which we'll go into.
One question really quickly was about Russian sage. They don't seem to do really well here. I love Russian sage. There's so many different cultivars in the market today, from tall ones to short ones. They do really well in a dry, really hot, bright, sunny spot. So just make sure perhaps that they're not waterlogged and needs good drainage, and keep trying in the right spot. And we'll get into, again, moving your plants around is totally acceptable to find the right place where it does the best at. So let's get back into the presentation here and looking at color in the shade garden. Color in the shade garden, you can really brighten shady areas with light colored plants. And again, we talked about dark plants and shade will disappear into the background. And if you do have a dark colored plant that you want to use in a shade garden, totally acceptable. You need to surround it with lighter colored plants so that you have it accentuated, so that it stands out and doesn't disappear in the landscape itself. Here's a great example of a shade garden. It's beautiful, but again, nothing really stands out other than the stone bench and then that what looks like sort of a stone birdhouse at the back. Here is a great example of a color garden that, shade garden that uses cool colors. And you see down here, you have these light purple lilac flowers. They disappear. They don't really stand out as much. They did a better job because they surrounded them with lighter colored foliage. But again, here's an example of a shade garden where you have, again, the key to color, white hydrangea that stands out because it's a neutral color, and the reds, the warm astilbe, the red astilbe here stand out in a shade garden. So remember, warm colors, neutral colors stand out a lot. Now, color in a sun garden. Sun gardens can handle brightly colored flowers. You want to use the reds and the yellows and the oranges and deep blues and purples to draw that attention. One thing to note, pastels, the lighter colored, light yellows, light pinks, those lighter colors washed out in the sun. There's so much light being beamed down on it that you really don't get that good sense of pastels. Save pastels for a little bit of a partial shade or shady garden if you can. And again, using color, you can repeat the combinations to have that unified look. Here's an example where you have a complete equal sort of spread of color in the garden, and your eye naturally goes from the left to the right. Here's an example of just really intense summer colors. Again, warm color schemes, the hot colors, perfect in a sun garden. They pop, they really come right out at you. And again, if you're using them in a larger space, it'll make it look smaller. Any questions regarding color before we move on to texture? One quick question I saw was, will the slideshow be sent out or should I be taking notes? We're happy to send out the slideshow as a PDF. We're also going to be sending out the plant list at the very end. So we're happy to do that for you, but it will come as a PDF. So no need to take notes. I understand that I want you guys just to sort of focus and absorb as much of this in, knowing that it's Saturday morning. I hope you all have a cup of coffee in your hand. And I know it's a lot to kind of listen to me talk while watching on TV on a screen. So I appreciate everyone's patience with that. Why don't we jump back into texture? And then again, sounds like a lot of the questions are about the specific plant combinations, which we'll get to shortly. So texture is another criteria of the landscape designer's toolkit that I want you all to consider. Some of you might, after this, go into your backyard, walk around, go to a nursery. I want you to look at texture because it refers to the surface qualities of an object that can be seen or felt. Texture is bark, whether it's rough or smooth, it's the flowers, it's the fruits, but it is the dominant source of texture in the plant world is foliage. So how can we use that in a more conscious way? So here is a great example of texture in foliage ranging from fine to medium to bold. So if you look at in this picture number 1, if you can see on the right side here, this is a bold, often called coarse textured leaf. It's large, it's massive, and this is an elephant ear. Hostas are a great example also of bold. Medium would be over here 3. That is typically what you find the most in
the plant kingdom, right? Look outside, you're going to be looking at camellia bush has medium plants. A lot of the leaves on trees are medium size and textured. Now the small here, this is a maidenhair fern in the bottom left by number 2. That is more fine textured. It's lacy, it's feathery, and it feels different, and you can use it in different ways. Now what's interesting is that distance affects the perception of texture. So here, some of you I think were asking, what is a great evergreen screen in the backyard? I have neighbors next to me very close, love them very much, but I don't need to see them every morning from my kitchen window when I'm making coffee. So when I moved in here, I put up a couple of these green giants, the green giant arborvitae. And as you see there alongside the house, from afar, you don't get that sense of a fine, feathery, delicate texture. Here on the right side, you see a close-up of their needles that is much more fine and feathery. So again, if you want to appreciate the texture of a plant, you're going to have to see it a little bit more close up. Otherwise, it disappears in the landscape. Here's an example of some fine textured plants. Small leaves, they provide a light and airy feel. They're relaxed, and they're often more casual gardens, and they recede into the background a lot. And again, they also make spaces seem bigger because they don't stand out. They have airy light coming through them. But if you really want to appreciate the plant up, you have to have it up close to where you're viewing it because, again, there's such small, fine feather textures. The bottom left is Amsonia. The top right is maidenhair fern, and this is Dicentra or bleeding hearts. Bold texture plants. These are just as wonderful to use in the landscape as those fine textured plants. They have large leaves or large flowers. They're visually dominant. They're bold. They give a much heavier, weightier feel to the garden, and they make spaces seem smaller when massed. So remember, if you have a very small garden, you might not want to be using as many bold textured plants unless you want to have it as a focal point. And you have one bold, large, focal textured, sort of bold textured plant in the middle. Here's a great example of a shade garden. And these are a mixture of bold, large hostas. There's probably 5 or 6 different types of hostas here. Then you have the fine, feathery flowers of the astilbe here in the front, right? So again, contrast the textures is key, but you have this bold plant, the hostas that pop out, that are visually dominant, that often become the focal point. One other thing I'll make note of is texture by season. It changes dramatically. Remember the very beginning, we had the wisteria in Brookside Gardens, and at the sort of a fine, feathery, delicate sort of grapes hanging down. That goes away, and then you're left with a more neutral, sort of medium textured leaf, which is honestly pretty boring on its own. Here you have an example of textures. You have the red twig dogwood. On the right, this is what it looks like in the summer, right? These are neutral, medium-sized leaves here, nothing particular. This is what most plants and bushes have. But look at it in the winter on the left side. When it loses its leaves, the texture changes. The bark and branches of woodies become more dominant. They become the dominant features, and shrubs that were once more coarse because of larger leaves are now finer with slender twigs. So again, season changes the way that we view the exact same plant. We want to do that very consciously here. Mixing texture is fun. Especially in the shade garden, you're going to rely on texture. So coarse textures can complement fine textures. For an example, you want to place a fine textured plant towards the back and a few coarser, bolder plants in the center, like here, and they really stand out and make it a really nice dynamic landscape design. Here's a great example of really mixing textures. You have the hostas here in the bottom left. You have the sensitive ferns there. You have the Japanese forest grass there, hostas. You have the bear's breeches there, the acanthus. And this wonderful mix of textures and shape and form can give you a dynamic, beautiful garden, even in a shade garden, because there's not a lot of range of color typically in a shade garden as much as we know in a sun garden. So again, texture is key. Here's a great example where you have similar textures amongst different types of plants. You have the boxwood here, these round, green,
very finely clipped hedges there, matching the shape and texture of these beautiful hydrangea arborescens Annabelle. Beautiful big mop heads of hydrangea there. So here, this is a conscious design to have a more unified look of shape and form and texture as you go from the boxwood to the hydrangea. Any questions regarding texture before we cover shape and form? And then we're going to dig into some great examples.
No questions just yet, Jason. You can see a few.
You are the best audience ever. I appreciate it. And of course, if you really have any burning questions, you're more than welcome to email us, and we're happy, over the coming weeks as we find time to try and respond and give you those sort of tips and tricks as much as possible. We really want to help you folks be as successful as possible. Okay, so let us dig down into shape and form, which is the last of the 3 landscape design criteria that I'm going to be covering today. So here, shape and form, something we don't consciously always look at or think of when we're in a nursery or even a landscape. You just think, wow, I love that really big weeping willow, right? We don't think of why maybe we love it. So shape refers to a 2-dimensional form, like a circle, a square, a diamond, and form refers to the 3-dimensional components of it. Is it a cube? Is it a cone, a sphere? Does it have a hard edge or a soft edge? And if you look on the graph, on the image on the right, do you have a pyramidal form? Do you have a columnar form? Do you have a fountain like a beautiful palm tree, or a weeping form? These are all important to understand, and we're going to go through them because it helps you to make your own perfect plant combinations and design consciously. So you want to place plants that have contrasting leaf shapes next to each other. You don't want to go too much. It might be a little too complex for the eye, but again, shape and form, you want to have plants that have a different shape, a different form next to each other to really contrast each other, especially leaf shapes that we're going to go into. Now remember, spreading and rounded forms are the most common forms. You look like at an akuba, you look like at an azalea. These are the sort of rounded forms. A boxwood is rounded. These are the more common forms in the landscape. So you might want to pair them with more unusual forms of plants, those that are columnar, those that are maybe pyramidal. And we'll go through some examples. Weeping trees, again, weeping cherry tree, a weeping willow, really great focal plants in sort of maybe a larger landscape or a backyard where you have a beautiful tree in the corner for that specific shape and form. Now, shape and form is often used consciously in landscape design to create formal or informal gardens. Formal gardens use rigid and linear forms. They create order and structure. Imagine a French parterre outside the Palace of Versailles. Very, very formal because it uses geometric patterns of boxwoods that have been clipped to death over centuries. Those poor trees, those poor bushes. Formal is simple geometric forms, and symmetry is key in it. You want everything balanced from the left and the right and the front and the back. Now, informal gardens, which are something that I love, are ones that use shapes and forms that are more rounded. They're natural forms, they soften a landscape, and they're shapes and forms that meld together in harmony. Nothing really dramatically stands out in terms of a shape and a form in these gardens. So here on the left, you have something that is almost looks like sort of an Asian garden. You have a lot of azaleas, some boxwoods, and they're all rounded shapes and forms, right? They're smooth edges. You have a softer look and a feel. It makes you feel relaxed. Versus on the right, you're using very contrasting shapes and forms, right? You have a pyramidal form here. You have this sort of spreading form, and you have the rounded forms below. So having dynamic, different types of forms in a landscape make it more visually interesting. Your eye stops longer in a landscape to look at all of these trees here and plants on the right versus on the left. If everything's a similar shape and form, it's very pleasing and relaxing, but your eye doesn't spend as much time looking at it. So remember, keep that in mind when you're consciously designing your garden. Here's a great example. Informal garden on the left, right? Almost like an English country cottage. Say hello to the little black cat there staring at you.
I love gardens like this. Again, this is my mother's English. I was raised in England. In the summers, we'd visit gardens like this. They're very relaxed, pop of color. It's almost just nature screaming at you. Versus on the right, and this looks like an Italian garden, very formal. And why is it formal? Again, symmetry. Everything is balanced here on the left and the right. You have these columnar trees. You have a round circle, but everything is perfectly balanced. It's beautiful, but again, it's all personal taste. But be conscious of how you use shape and form to design. Any questions about shape and form before we move on to the selection process and then get into the good stuff, which is all of these plant combinations that you folks are here for?
Anne wants to know if there are any shapes that are considered easier to maintain.
Sure, shapes that probably don't require any pruning themselves, right? So I guess it just depends. Rounded shapes are probably much easier to maintain than like, and I'm thinking in my mind of like a boxwood, right? If you want to have sort of a formal garden, you're going to have to do a lot of clipping of bushes that have very sort of dense foliage that there's no holes in them. So boxwoods are great. They're often clipped into these ridiculous shapes. Ladue Topiary Garden is great. It's just a few hours away. Visit that if you want to see perfectly clipped boxwoods and hedges and shapes. They make them into people riding horses, but obviously the rounded ones are probably the easiest for a gardener to ship and to clip into shape itself. But again, that means that you're having a more formal garden, right? If you have a more manicured shape, it tends to be more formal. Any other questions before we go on to the selection process?
I have one person who's curious about the hosta garden plant slide. It was the sensitive fern and what else?
Let me go back to that really quickly. And I might not know the exact cultivar. So it's this one, I'm assuming. So here on the left are hostas. In the middle here is a sensitive fern that likes wet conditions. Here is a Japanese forest grass, Hakanakloa. Again, here is another hosta. And the back, it's called Acanthus mollis. It's a Mediterranean plant. It's where the Greeks and Romans got the scrolls and the shape of the scrolls that they use on columns, and a lot of their architectural designs were inspired by this plant here. Its other common name is bear's breeches. You want to be careful with that plant because we're kind of right on the zone where you want to find one that really does well in zone 7. A lot of them are zone 7 and 8 and 9 where they might die in a really hard winter. So just keep that in mind. But the cultivar of the hostas, I can't tell you, honestly. And I hope that answers your question. Any other questions before we dive into the selection process? I want to make sure you guys feel comfortable, you're tracking along. Hopefully you're still interested. If not, pour yourself another cup of coffee.
I think that's it for now, Jason.
Great, let's dive back down into the slides. So selection process. This is what you folks do when go out in your backyard after this presentation. I want you to pick the one flower, the one plant, the one bush, the one tree that you love. Ask yourself, why do I love it so much? What about it do I like? Force yourself to identify that one primary element of interest for that plant that you love. And then go through this process that I'm about to walk you through right now and figure out what types of companion plants might go well with it. So, do you want to find, let's say, a beautiful flower and you love the color of it? Well, do you want to contrast that flower? Do you want to have, if it's yellow, again, do you want a purple flower next to it so it's dynamic? It's that analogous color selection process. Or do you want to have a yellow flower that has maybe a light orange with it? So it's a complementary color scheme. So again, think of how you want to pair it. And again, look at, is it the flower you like, the foliage you like? Is it the color? Is it the shape, the habit, or the size? And we'll go through this. So here's an example. I love echinacea. I just think it's a wonderful native plant. It's great for pollinators, for birds.
for butterflies. It's just wonderful to have in the garden space, and they have so many cultivars of different colors out right now. So here I'm choosing Echinacea as my plant I want to try and find a companion plant for. I look at the flower, right? And the Echinacea here in this picture, for those who are asking, it's that pink flower right now with that kind of dark, almost reddish orangish seed head. Let's talk about the color. Great, so the flower, let's focus on the color. We're not talking about the petals, the shape, the form. We're just looking at the color. I want to match it with something that is very contrasting. Great, I picked Rudbeckia, which is the yellow flower here. It's otherwise known as Black-Eyed Susan. It's the state flower from Maryland. So it looks pretty. For me personally, it looks a little complex. It looks like they're fighting each other in the landscape because they are the exact same shape and form and texture as each other. So now this is a good example of, okay, well, I really like Echinacea. I really like Rudbeckia. They do great together in a sunny, hot spot in the garden. I do want to put them together. You might want to, since they're so similar in shape and form, put them in blocks. You have a big block of Echinacea, the pink, in front of a big block of the yellow Rudbeckia at the back. So that is one way to make it a little bit more visually pleasing. Again, this for me is, it's pretty, but it can be enhanced upon just by placement. Now, even moving forward, okay, great, let's look at the landscape. This is a very sort of naturalized, more sort of modern, naturalized country garden. You have the Echinacea and Rudbeckia, it's beautiful. But if you want to take it to that next level and get that perfect plant combination and have a more refined contrast, you still have the Echinacea here, but now I want to look at the petal shape, and I want to find something that contrasts with that shape and texture. So you add the pink muhly grass behind it, which in the fall, late summer, has this kind of beautiful feathery pink kind of almost just this cloud it creates. So this is a little bit more of a refined contrast, a little bit more of a better plant combination. Now, taking it one step further, you have a layered contrast here. You have the Echinacea, right, still there. And I want to now say, I want to have a contrast for shape and texture and color. So I've added Stipa tenuissima, which is Mexican feather grass down here, right, which has a light, airy, soft texture. Then I've added Achillea, which is the yarrow, which comes in all different sorts of colors. This is sort of a light pink. So this is almost a monochromatic color design, but I think it is very sophisticated. I think in the garden space, if you want that kind of next level of design that you're going for, compare this, where you still have Echinacea and you're pairing it with Rudbeckia, to this. I think personally that this is a more refined plant combination, sort of a perfect plant marriage. And again, it's because we didn't just go with color, and we wanted to make sure we had a contrast in shape and form and texture of the Echinacea petals. Here's a second example we'll go through. This is a Japanese painted fern. Here, that fern on the right, it is a beautiful fern that comes up. There's a couple different cultivars. This one is extremely silver, almost white. You pair it with the Brunera, which is the Siberian bugloss, right? Which has, now it has a different shape. It even has a different texture of leaf, but the colors are almost exactly the same. So when you have them together, as you see this, don't you see that this Japanese fern almost disappears, right? And I'm not saying that this wouldn't look good in the landscape, but I think the purpose of this example is, how can we make this better, right? So let's go on to the next one. Now I'm looking at the leaf. I want a contrast to the leaf itself. I want to make sure that that contrast comes out much stronger. So you have the Japanese painted fern here, and you have a hosta. This is Lakeside Jazzy Jane. Again, the industry has a lot of fun. I think they sit around drinking wine late at night, coming up with these fun cultivar names. Lakeside Jazzy Jane, you got to appreciate that. So sure, I think this looks a lot better personally, because here, again, I feel like you're not getting, each plant is not being respected because they're too similar in color. Here, this stands out a little bit more. You have the kind of that white, creamy silver picks up on each other. How can we maybe take this to the next level? Let's add a third plant and see what that looks like. Again, here's the layered contrast that we have. We have the Japanese painted fern still down here. And then we're looking at the leaf. We want to have shape and color and texture added to it. So I have added Rodgersia, which is this wonderful plant back there, which is sort of a darker, kind of almost green maroon looking leaf that is sort of longer. It's a little bit rougher in texture, with the Astilbechensis, the Chinese Astilbe down there, which is, we're not doing it for the flower again, we're doing it for the leaves. This will obviously bloom at a later date and change this entire plant combination. And again, that changes by season. So looking here right now, I think that this is a nice plant combination, because we are being very conscious of not just saying, okay, here you have a difference in shape and form, but the color washes out and they do each other a disservice. Compared to here, it's a little bit more of a sophisticated design in a shade garden. Any questions before we sort of move on? I will say that you want to create a canvas in the garden space with a neutral foliage. Again, that's greens and the browns. You want to experiment. I remember when I first started getting into sort of gardening, and I worked at Hillwood Museum, I was head of design operations, and I remember talking to the gardeners and thinking, a lot of them move these plants around a lot. And I realized it's because they're experts. It's because they know that a plant changes over time, that the conditions of a site change over time, that your interests change over time. So feel free in springtime, when it's still cool, you're still getting rain, or in fall, move your plants around. You can certainly dig them up and plant them somewhere else where they look better or they do better. Or why don't you go get a nursery, get your favorite plant that you're trying to pair, and walk around the yard with the plant to just see what it goes best with. And again, personal taste is always best. Always, always best. What you like won't automatically be what I like, and that's completely fine, because again, your garden is your personal playpen. It's where you should find joy, and you're going to find that plant combination that speaks to your heart. So let's break for any questions that I hopefully am smart enough to answer or are relevant to this.
Someone wants to know what color the Astilbe next to the painted ferns are.
What color?
Yes.
So when you're looking at a, one second, when you're looking at a Chinese, so there's, first of all, Astilbe are wonderful. They have lots of different bloom times over maybe like a 6-week period. The Chinese Astilbe honestly comes in a variety of colors. You can find dark pinks, lilacs, light pinks or so. So it is just sort of a species of Astilbe that has a lot of cultivars in it. So I'm not sure in that picture which one that cultivar is, but you have a lot of options. A lot of the Chinese Astilbe still have that same leaf structure. And again, for this plant combination, you're looking not at the flower, which comes, on at some point and that changes the dynamic, but here you're looking at the leaf itself. So again, that leaf is somewhat similar across some of the Chinese Astilbes that you're looking at. They will have a different shape and form, some taller, some larger as well. So, but a lot of them are the majority of the pinks, the darker sort of purples or so, and maybe even some cream colors as well. Any other questions?
I think that's it for right now.
Okay. One other question is, could you recommend, I think I just saw this, could you recommend another evergreen privacy screen with a very small footprint? So I guess that's a really good question, because essentially a lot of these evergreen hedges are super, super large. So in my backyard, I do have a couple of those green giants, right? I get up on my ladder every couple of years and I prune them, right? So that's something that you probably don't want to have to do. I also have, as I'm looking behind me right now, I also have, it's a magnolia, I think it's Little Girl magnolia. So it's a beautiful magnolia that is more columnar and it stays relatively small. I got it maybe 6 years, 7 years ago. It was probably 5 feet. Now it's maybe 10 feet by about 5 feet wide, but it's pretty thick, so it's a nice privacy screen. It has beautiful white magnolia flowers on it, but it doesn't get big. It's not like that southern magnolia that will take over your entire backyard and you don't want. This stays relatively columnar. It can also be pruned in the spring time frame, sorry, fall time frame. And so that's one other option that I have noticed. You can also get a green giant, I think it's called Emerald Spire. So it is an arborvitae, but it's an emerald spire that is much more narrow. It maybe gets up to about 10 feet. It's a much slower growing evergreen hedge though. The green giant just grows and grows and grows very quick, but I think the cultivar Emerald Spire is available very easily in nurseries. I've seen it in Home Depot and other places as well. So I hope that that helps. And I didn't want to get off topic too much, but privacy screens are really important and always hard to kind of get right as well. I've seen Akubas eventually can get quite tall, maybe 8 feet or so. So it just depends on how tall you want that privacy screen. Let's jump back down into, I guess, some of the reason of why you're here was these fun combinations. Now, again, I could go on and on and on. These lists could be extensive. We could spend days and days and days. But again, that's why I wanted to spend the first half of the class really making sure that you folks understood why these look good together. They work well in the landscape. Again, cultural requirements of light and water and soil are important. But I wanted you to understand why they look good together so you folks can start making your own combinations. So now I'm sure your garden out back looks something like this, sort of a field of a naturalistic kind of planting, and if not, we will get you there. So starting in the spring time frame, let's go over some of these fun kind of bulbs. Daffodils. We have the narcissus, tete-a-tete, and we have the scillas with the Siberian squill, the little blue flowers there. Here again, you have this analogous color scheme of the yellows and the blues, and again, why it works, I think, is because you have a variance of height as well. And of course, in shape and size, the daffodils are much larger than the scillas below it. Here you have a little bit later in spring. I still have a lot of my bearded irises in the front yard in bloom. We've been blessed with a very, very long spring. Some of you might want that warm weather, but I can tell you the plants have been loving it. Here we have bearded iris. The Edith Wolford, I believe, is the bicolor one here, the yellow and lilac, and the feedback is the dark purple there. But bearded irises are wonderful. They have wonderful fragrances. You don't want to crowd them. If they become too crowded, they might stop blooming as much. You can divide them, give them some space, and they don't want to be waterlogged. This is mixed with Baptisia australis, which is false indigo. This is a lemon meringue, a beautiful yellow. But here you have the fine, delicate texture of the false indigo mixed with a little bit more of the heavier, sort of rounded heads of the bearded irises. But I think this is a great combination. Here we have peonies. Again, not native, but I'm sorry, I need them in my garden. Love them. Absolute amazing fragrances. Great for floral design. Cut a couple stems, bring them inside. They last for quite a long time. You can also wash them under water, a faucet, and they might have ants on them. Here's two different types. They come in, the pinks and the whites and the darker kind of pinks and maroons, mixed with false indigo, which is Baptisia. So again, you have this sort of long cylindrical form of the Baptisia mixed with the more sort of larger heads of the peonies, and you can certainly use any peony that you want. This is a fun combination recommended to me by our director of horticulture, Phil Normandy. Here you have a Siberian iris on the right. It has these beautiful purple flowers. We're mixing it here with the Simafuga, which is the black cohosh. Again, when these all bloom, and this is an intersectional hybrid Ito peony on the left, and this one is Bartzella. It's just beautiful. It's full with ruffles. It's somewhat compact, but the flowers are gorgeous for this Ito peony. And I think just the combination of these yellows with this sort of dark black cohosh, which gets much taller than both of these, mixed with this
is just a really, really fun combination to have in that sort of spring sun garden. Now, this is everyone's favorite. If you don't have it at home, it's really easy to do. You want to get a trellis. I have my clematis growing on my lamp post in the front, and I might add like a little sort of shrub rose below it. So here on the left, you have the clematis niobe, this beautiful dark kind of red burgundy mixed with the antique floribunda rose. Now, the clematis on the left gets really tall. You can train it up to 10, 12 feet at least. This antique floribunda rose is a little bit smaller, so it'll be sort of at the base of that as in the front. On the right, we have the president, which is sort of a standard large purple one. Again, there's various sizes of clematis from just 2 inches to, like literally 6 inches. And you have a beautiful English climbing rose. So you want to have these climbing roses and the clematis on a structure, whether it's a trellis or a pole, is great to have. This, I just went earlier this week. I was walking around the neighborhood and took these pictures in someone's front yard. I think that this clematis is Nellie Moser, and it is just mixed with a knockout rose. Again, don't knock the knockout roses, honestly, because they're super easy. We have warm, humid climates in the summer that are honestly horrible for roses. Typically, you have to use a lot of chemicals, which we don't want to do. Knockout roses are just as good, and here you can see why they even work when you pair it with something dynamic like a clematis. In the right picture here, you have a nice purple bearded iris thrown in there. So these people know what they're doing. You have the color pop, but also the shape and form pop too. I like this just because when you start to have the leaves come out on these plants, this is the black lace elderberry. Even on its own, I love this plant. I think everyone should have it in its garden. It's just the most heavenly texture and shape and form, and then it has these beautiful kind of flower heads that come out later on. I paired this with the spirea, and if you look at the double play Big Bang, there's a lot of different cultivars of spirea itself. It comes out, and in the fall, the leaves get this kind of darker, richer, redder. The newer leaves are this kind of yellow. But again, you have sort of a medium coarse textured leaf paired with a very, very fine textured. You would typically have the spirea in the front and this elderberry in the back. And they flower at different times, but again, it really is the foliage that you're going here for that. And again, you can have tons of beautiful flowers in the front if you want the flowers, but again, you don't always need to focus on the flowers when you're doing plant combinations. Here is a plant combination that does focus on the flowers. You have the drumstick allium, which are the dark purple, kind of almost egg-shaped flowers here. You have the silver feather grass in the back, beautiful, long, kind of feathery grasses mixed with a Russian sage. And someone was talking about the Russian sage. Again, dry spots, well-drained, full sun. But you have this combination where you have similar colors, different shades between the Russian sage and the allium, the drumstick allium, with feathers here, the feather grass, but then a contrast not only in darker color, but in shape and form of the drumstick allium. This is probably one of my favorite combinations. In front of my house, I have echinacea, I have agastache, which is also known as hyssop, and I also have sort of a beautiful achillea, a yarrow. So I have, and I don't have the yarrow in this picture, I think we'll see it on another slide, but this is the echinacea, the pink flower here. The agastache or hyssop is in the back there. They have come a long way in hybridizing this and creating new cultivars of the agastache. Both of these are natives to the East Coast, and they are great for pollinator gardens. And I love them because look at the interplay here on the left. You have such a wonderful mix of the shape and the form. You have these tall, beautiful flowers of the agastache, which literally is a bee magnet. You're going to have different insects flying around at all times of the day. They literally bloom from May until October. My favorite is blue boa, which has sort of dark purple stems. They flower much earlier than the straight species. And they don't self-seed as much. Agastache, if you don't want it, popping up in your garden, cut the seed heads, cut the flower heads before they go to seed, before in late fall. Now here is another sort of naturalized field. Piet Oudolf, which is a famous landscape designer, I think from Holland, creates these sort of naturalistic landscape designs. And here we have a mix of the agastache, black adder right there, mixed with the pale purple coneflower and the rattlesnake, which is native more to sort of Missouri area, but it does well here. So again, shape and form and color and texture is just a beautiful mix in the landscape. This is here in our Four Seasons garden at Brookside Gardens. We have the Delphinium excaltatum, which is larkspur, sort of our native Delphinium or larkspur. Usually comes from a little bit higher mountain areas, but it does well here. It's a biannual, so it'll self-seed. And also we have the hollyhock, which you would have to pretty much get a seed packet. Now, if you want to create this look, get the hollyhock seed packet that has something like heritage on it, or it has antique, something that indicates sort of it's an older species, an older sort of version of it. Typically, when you see the hollyhock, they'll come up in fall, and then they'll really bolt in the spring, and you get these beautiful flowers. And then they're also biannuals that will self-seed themselves. But I just love this combination, both because it's a variance of height, but just in color and in the shape and form of the flowers. On the left here, we have the Rudbeckia, which is the black-eyed Susan. This is a Becky mixed. Again, black-eyed Susans have a lot of different cultivars. This is mixed with Veronica spicata, Speedwell. And you see just how the really contrasting shape and form of the flower heads between these two flowers and the colors is just that pop, that really kind of fun, jazzy, dynamic pop. Again, I'm gonna push at some point knockout roses. If you love your roses and you don't want to have to spray them a lot, knockout roses are great, and they can still look pretty if you pair them. I'm not a big fan of knockout roses on their own. I am a big fan if you pair them. This is with catmint, that purple flower there that mine in the front yard is already blooming, started blooming about a week ago. It's going to keep on blooming. You can cut the catmint down probably in early July, end of June, and then it'll come back up for a second rebloom later in August for you. So you get two long, beautiful growths from it. Here you have lamb's ear. Look at that texture, that beautiful texture there. It's soft and fuzzy. I'm pairing it here with an English lavender. So again, purple and silver, best friends. They love each other a lot. And that's why not only the contrast and texture works, but these colors. Here we have salvia, sage there on the left. Meinacht is the cultivar. It's nice and tall, big flowers, mixed with really feathery, fine Artemisia on the right, which is wormwood. But again, the silvers and the purples are just best friends in the landscape. So someone was talking about bee balm monarda earlier in a question, and I did something perhaps a little bit unusual, but I wanted to pair this, again, yarrow. I love, it is good for pollinators, but it also is very hardy. It does great in dry, hot spots, and they do have these rhizomes that kind of come out and they will spread. You can certainly divide it and put it throughout your garden. I wanted to pair it, so on the right, this is the yarrow. It's pretty short. It's maybe 12 to 16, 18 inches or so. Bee balm can get really tall, maybe 3-4 feet, just depends on the cultivar. That's the middle plant here. These kind of fuzzy mop heads that looks like it's from a Dr. Seuss book or so. On the left, we have the smoke bush, which is just a beautiful bush. I'm not pairing these together because of the flowers in the smoke bush, which you see here, it's called smoke bush because when they're in flower, it looks like there's a haze of smoke in front of them. But really, when you look at these beautiful dark purple wine kind of colored leaves, you have almost a monochromatic design here. And I would put the smoke bush at the back, then I would put the monarda bee balm in the front, and then the yarrow down below. So you have sort of a layered garden effect here. This is something that we have in Brookside Gardens. We have the ruby muley grass. This is sort of something that new we came across. It's called it's the undaunted. And we have it in the parking garden. It typically starts to get these beautiful kind of seed heads, flowers almost, I'd say late August, early September, that go on till frost. But Verbena bonariensis, let that become your best friend. It's great for pollinators that are the smaller kind of little insects. It will come up through a thick bed of whatever else you have below it, and it has these tall branches and then these beautiful little flowers on the top that flower literally from, I'd say, June through to almost first frost. So I have them in my garden. They pop up. They're kind of a fun, dynamic pop. But what makes it here fun is you have such a contrast, not just in color, but in shape and form and texture. These kind of tight flowers of the verbena mixed with the pink muhly grass behind it. So again, Verbena bonariensis, I would add that to your garden. Any questions about the sun garden before we move on to the shade garden here? And I want to be as respectful as possible. Any questions, Brooke?
I see some really good questions about pairings and combinations. One person asked what you would pair with white David phlox.
So that's a great question. So typically white David phlox, it's a beautiful phlox. It has just these kind of giant white heads. It's pretty tall. I'd say almost 3 feet or so. I think that something like this, let's just kind of go through the criteria, right? It has a great fragrance to it. What do you like most about the flower, right? Again, that selection process. Is it its height, right? Are you trying to find something that is complementary, contrasting to the height? You probably don't want a plant that's the exact same height. You might not want a plant that's white. Maybe you can have it with, if you want a variegated carex or so, that's below it. You can certainly then play off the white with that. Or you can have a total different color pop, right? I guess that's just important to understand exactly what you like the most about it. And I'm assuming that you like just the fact that it has these beautiful sort of white flowers. It typically blooms a little bit later in the summer, maybe like July, September or so. So honestly, you could, pair it with something like a tall grass to kind of have that accentuated features of the feathery tall grass with a sort of compact white flower heads. You could even pair it with echinacea. You could pair it with a lot of other sort of color pops too. Again, it's a white flower, so it'll really work well in maybe a little bit of a darker spot. It'll also help to be sort of, maybe if you have it in the mix of a color garden, you might have it in the middle as a sort of a focal point when it's blooming. It just depends on really how you want to use it. But it's a very beautiful phlox that definitely comes out later in the summertime. So any other questions?
Someone was asking about kind of the difference between a tree peony versus a garden peony.
So a tree peony typically it's much larger. It's usually almost looks like a miniature tree depending on the types of cultivars. The flowers aren't those double flowers that you get from sort of a regular peony, you might say. They also bloom earlier. Tree peonies bloom earlier. They've already bloomed and probably are off bloom right now, versus my peony in the backyard is just about to kind of come out and probably will start bursting in the next couple of days because of this warm weather. But again, the tree peony is usually more a couple of rows of petals, versus the other peonies are more sort of tighter. They're almost like that rose that has dozens of rows of petals that are more thicker and fuller. And again, the tree peony doesn't have that fragrance typically associated with the peonies that we're starting to see come out right now. One other question I saw from Anne was, where can I find some of these beautiful natives? So one thing that we're working on for you folks is, and we might get that to you by Tuesday, I apologize, we've just been super busy. We have a plant sale going on at Brookside Gardens, and I invite you to go to brooksidegardens.org. We have a lot of unusual houseplants and succulents in containers, but one of our sisters essentially, organizations under Montgomery Parks is Locust Grove. And they're also having a plant sale right now, and they are selling a lot of native plants. I'm actually, after this presentation, going to go out there and pick up my plant order.
But if you go to montgomeryparks.org, our own local parks that manages, thousands and thousands of acres that Brookside Gardens is run under, they have, I believe, on the front page a link to this plant sale. And it's a combination of Brookside Gardens and Locust Grove and another third party that's selling. The Locust Grove has native plants, really great prices, a variety for both sun and shade. Go online and check that out. We'll make sure to also go ahead and send on Monday morning a link to that as well, that plant sale. But if you're hungry right now, go online and order from Locust Grove. But we're also trying to get some other resources for native plants as well. I would also encourage a lot of you folks, maybe now's not the time, it's a little bit later in the season, order online if you can't find it in your local nursery. I know Benke's closed, we're all heartbroken, and we're starting to get less and less of our local nurseries being open. But I have ordered some natives online, and they come beautifully packaged, but you typically want to put them in the ground, early May or so, late April. Let's move on to the shade garden right now, if that's okay. So this is a wonderful picture of the shade garden of the Garden of Taffy Turner. She is one of our beloved adult tour guides. She is a master gardener extraordinaire, and you can see here the proof is in the pudding, and her garden is beautiful. So I'm assuming all of you have a garden like this at home. If not, here's some plant combinations to help you enjoy them. So in late winter, you're going to have the Helleborus orientalis. It's known as the Christmas rose, mixed here with a galanthus, a snowdrop. The different sort of sizes of flowers works really well. They're both relatively the same height. There's a lot of different types of hellebore that you can mix with this that bloom at the same time, different cultivars. But again, that kind of delicate sort of graceful sort of floor cover is really fun. Here we have winter aconite mixed with snowdrop. The winter aconite are kind of a ground cover here in the woodland setting in the shade garden. They're yellow, they kind of cover the floor, mixed with, again, snowdrops. So you can certainly mix a variety of different plants there. You can even, of course, mix in your hellebores there too. But here you see at a larger landscape photo on the left what that really looks like. You have the winter aconite again, and just kind of want to give you senses of how you can mix one thing with multiple things with the Dutch crocus here, right? And there's a lot of different types of fun crocuses that you can match with them. But wonderful ground carpets that work well up close or far away to blanket larger spaces. This is a fun grouping that we have in our gardens here at Brookside Gardens. So you have the Spanish bluebells on the right, and then here in the middle and on the right, here are the tassels, the fiddleheads that come out, the new leaves that come out, almost this beautiful, rich amber orange in spring. And here's what they become when they become the Japanese tassel fern. Now, this is an interesting hellebore. It's hellebore nigercors. It's a Lenten rose, but it's nigercors is the specific species of it, and it's white beauty. I'm not focused so much in this plant combination on the flowers. I am focused more so here on the stained glass leaves. We call them stained glass leaves. If you look closely, they have these beautiful white variegation. And so that, especially when these kind of fiddleheads are coming up, and you have this beautiful lush backdrop of this kind of bright blue Spanish bluebells, is just a wonderful combination to have in the garden space. And you can find that at Brookside Gardens, and that was probably about 3 weeks ago. This was a few weeks ago. I took a picture myself at Brookside Gardens. You have the azalea in the background, and this sort of, it looks like it's in the sun, but most of the time it is in the shade, and will do well, of course, in the shade. You have the Hokonocloa macro, the Japanese fountain grass down below, which is feathery, beautiful kind of gold there, that really pulls in the yellow flowers of the wood poppies. Now, wood poppies are native as well, and they will spread through rhizomes, and you can certainly dig them up and give them to neighbors or move them around the garden space. But I thought that this was a fun combination, both in just how things look, but you have the height of the azalea at the back, and then you have the wood poppies kind of dotted in through there, and then the Japanese grass in front. I love my Virginia bluebells. I think they are one of the most magical plants because
for the most of the year, they're invisible. You don't see them. They come up in March timeframe, typically end of March, maybe early April, and they have these beautiful arching kind of pinnacles of blue flowers. They're native, obviously, Virginia is the name, and I've seen them a lot in sort of a little bit wetter areas. You can mix it with an English primrose, which is that bottom flower there. There's a difference in textures. The primrose has these kind of coarser textured leaves versus the Virginia bluebells is sort of a taller, smoother plant. But the Virginia bluebells disappears. It just disappears completely in a couple of weeks. You're already starting to see the flowers die out. The stems are looking kind of bad. Again, I have my Virginia bluebells packed up against a lot of other flowers and plants because they are beautiful when they're in full bloom, and then they kind of poop out and then they disappear for the rest of the year. But they are great, tough plants. I actually have mine in an area that does get dry in the summer, and it's totally fine because at that point it's pretty much dormant. Myosotis, again, it kind of reseeds itself. It's a forget-me-not. It is this beautiful, misty kind of plant, great from far away. And we've paired it here. I believe that's an ostrich fern. This is at our Brookside Gardens, but that kind of wonderful interplay of kind of this haze of blue with the kind of delicate ferns, I think it's just really fun. Now, for those of you who don't know the difference between the Japanese primrose and the English primrose, here in the middle is the Japanese one. It's also called a candlestick primrose. They like much wetter conditions. It's almost can just be in standing water practically or water's edge. They have much taller flowers, hence the name candelabra. Here's the English primrose. It's cute, it's small. You can use it to kind of line walkways and sort of the darker forested areas. But they're beautiful sort of spring bloomers. You can mix that with here the autumn fern. And obviously they're going to have sort of a lighter green to them earlier on. But again, that sort of mix, I think, just is really fun. Ferns can take the wetter conditions as well if you want to use it with a Japanese primrose. Again, ostrich fern. For those of you who have ostrich fern in wet conditions with some sunlight, they will spread. They will cover your garden. But you know what? Great. Let me tell you, they are beautiful. You can dig them up, divide them, give them to a neighbor. You can certainly manage them. In my backyard, which is really dark and dry, I have a couple. They struggle. So again, finding a little bit of a wetter condition for them that gets more light is great. You can create this wonderful look. Look at that beautiful field of ostrich ferns with the azaleas in full bloom. I just think that's a really, really fun combination. This is at Brookside Gardens. Here you have the hostas, and now this is called sweet flag. It's sort of a grassy type. It's related to the iris. It's Acorus calamus. The flower is insignificant, but when you have a larger garden space like this, right, you want to have these kind of contrasting textures and shapes of the leaves, right? So here's the hostas with completely different texture and shape and form of the sweet flag with the azaleas in the back. And especially at a larger garden space, I think it works really well. Now, when you're up close, this is really fun in a shade garden. You have these beautiful epimediums, which do well in a very, very dry spot. They're very hardy. There's a lot of different types, but the leaves here I think are gorgeous, and the flowers, mine are in flower right now in the backyard. Pulmonaria, which is called lungwort. Look at that beautiful sort of shape of longer leaves, that silver, mixed with the violas on the right. This is the Labrador viola that has these really kind of chocolatey leaves with these purple flowers. I think this is just a really fun combination on the kind of ground floor. This is for you people that want natives. We have the woodland phlox, Phlox divaricata, which is this kind of feathery white, sorry, the phlox is on the left. I need more coffee. The woodland phlox is on the left, that beautiful purple right here that comes up. You have the whitewood asters here, related obviously to the asters you see in the fall, but this comes up in the springtime frame. A lot of them are out right now. We paired this with a wood fern. This is just sort of a beautiful fern. It's maybe about 15, 16 inches or so. I think this combination is really fun. And you have some fun natives to work with.
I think I talked about sedges before, but here's an interesting plant combination where you're using bleeding hearts, Dicentrus spectabilis, and you have carex, and the cultivar is snowcap. So you want to have the bleeding hearts at the back. They probably get about 16, 18 inches. And then you have the sedge, these wonderful variegated leaves in the front. And I think that's just a really pretty combination because you have the height is good, but you also have such a pop of the white in front that I think pulls out. If you look here closely in the top right, that white sedge pulls out the little ends of those flowers and the florets of the pink bleeding hearts there. Here's another native combination. You have the Iris cristata alba, which is the dwarf crested iris here on the right, relatively small, spreads via rhizomes. We've paired it here with the wild ginger, the Asarum canadense, right there, which is sort of a larger heart-shaped leaves. And on the left, we have the Dicentra eczema, which is the fringed bleeding heart. This has a little bit of a different leaf compared to, say, this one. Again, this is Dicentra spectabilis. It's not as fine-toothed of a leaf. This is the fringed bleeding heart, but I think this is a fun combination for the shade garden and native. Again, here's where we all struggle in our shade garden. You are essentially challenged because there's not a lot of color, and color options in the shade garden aren't as abundant as with a sun garden. So here you have the spotted dead nettle on the bottom right, white Nancy. Again, you can come in just straight greens, but this is a fun sort of silver white. Right above it, you have the variegated Solomon's seal, which I think is beautiful. And then you have the carex, evergold, sedge down there on the left, and then what looks like maybe some ostrich fern in the back. But you see they're playing on the variegated combination here, right? We're looking at the whites, the white edge of this leaves, and the whites there. So I think that that white pulls it together, but you have the variance of contrasting shape, size, and texture. I think that really works. Again, here you're using dead nettle. There's a different cultivar. This is the dead nettle. It has a little purple flower. And you're mixing it with Japanese painted fern, different color, different texture. And again, you have the Solomon seal. So you can certainly play around, and maybe you have a big grouping of the dead nettle in the middle, and you might surround it with the Solomon seal. And on one side, you have the painted fern, right? And the other side, you might have some sedge, right? That grass down there. So you can certainly have plant marriages that have 5, 7, 9 different combinations that work. Now, Stilbe is every gardener's best friend. There's a lot of different types. This is the Chinese Stilbe. Again, the purple, look how tall it is. That's probably 4 feet or so. Really, really tall Stilbe. And then the hostas, the Patriot is the variegated one there. I'm not sure what these hostas in the bottom right are. But again, mixing the hostas with almost anything, you get a great combination, but it loves the Stilbe and they work really well together. And there are dozens, hundreds of different cultivars of hostas. I love this combination because not only is it different shape and texture, but you get color. You're finally bringing some color through, not just flowers, of course, because again, the flowers are not going to give you the color combinations in the backyard as much, but you're going to rely on the texture of leaves and the color of leaves. Look at this beautiful heuchera. It's called Midnight Rose. It's wonderful, warm, kind of rich wine burgundy color. And the bottom right is a plant that many of us haven't really seen, but I invite you to investigate it more. It's from Japan and China. It's called Mucdenia rossii, otherwise known as just Mucdenia. It has a couple different cultivars, but it has these kind of red fringes on them as well, which is fun. And here again, on the right, you have your Solomon seal, and then you have the Japanese forest grass, or Hakana cloa there. But I just think that this color pop is really, really fun in a darker area to kind of lighten it up and give it some color. Again, hostas, I'm not sure what that cultivar is. It could be First Frost. There are so many different cultivars that you can enjoy. And this is mixed with sweet woodruff, which is Gallium odoratum. And there's a juga on the bottom right there. And don't poo-poo a juga. Let me tell you, there's some spots that you struggle to find a plant in a dark, shady area that might be dry, that you just need to cover the floor. And there are some really interesting cultivars that come out. It will spread. Again, you're going to have to cut it up and divide it sometimes, but don't dismiss it entirely. There's also some great variegated ajuga. But here's, look at that beautiful fine little leaves of the sweet woodruff that I just think work great. Here on the right, we're using sweet woodruff again, almost as a filler plant, mixed with Brunnera, Siberian bugloss. Look how beautiful that kind of combination. You have such a difference of the leaf in color and texture and form with that kind of bright yellow line of that woodruff. Moving on again, hostas. I know hostas, but it is a shade gardener's best friend, and there's hundreds of different types to choose from. But look at why this works. You have the American maidenhair fern, the Adiantum pendatum, and it works because you have a difference, not only just in color tone really, but more so the texture, the fine feathery texture of the maidenhair with a more coarser, bolder, rougher leaf. Remember, going back to the criteria of texture, contrast in texture equates to something beautiful like this. Here we have, again, hosta in the back right, and you have the heuchera, coral bells in the back, sort of a darker cultivar, and the front you have the cultivar crow's feather. That's a Tiarella cordifolia. It's called a foam flower. It has flowers that are pretty, some are insignificant, some cultivars are better, but you really get it for, look at that variegated, interesting leaf you have there, right? So you're mixing really contrasting color, and then of course here with the hostas you have a contrasting texture and shape of form. Now in this picture, there's a lot to talk about, so I'll try and point it out. You have the carex, the Japanese sedge down here. The cultivar is Everest, and you want to repeat it throughout the garden so that there's a continuity of eye flow, right? And then here at the back there, you have a ligularia. That's a big leaf ligularia, these kind of chunky, fleshy, really, really nice leaves that are bold and dark and shiny, mixed with this wonderful hydrangea, oak leaf hydrangea. The cultivar is Little Honey. It stays relatively small, right? The regular oak leaf hydrangea can get quite tall, 6 feet or more. This stays pretty small, 2-3 feet. And then you're mixing it as well with a Pulmonaria longifolia. And so I just think this is a really fun combination. And again, you see how the oak leaf hydrangea stands out because it's sort of the odd man out, right? Surrounded by all this white and silver in the other plants. Here we have, I think this is our last slide for the shade garden. You have, again, the autumn fern, which obviously I'm partial to, but right below it you have this cute little patch of European wild ginger, Serum europaeum, and they're shiny, a different sort of color, darker green, and of course here the picture on the right is the autumn fern that's a little bit maybe October or so, right, it's still kind of getting into that fall where it gets that color. But I think just the variance of shape and texture and form is just really exciting. So let's quickly jump into some questions before we wrap up, and I think we're pretty much on time.
Jason, some people are asking if these plants are deer resistant, or if you have any deer resistant combinations that you could recommend.
So I would say, I would invite you, oftentimes we have a wonderful class at Brookside Gardens called Deer Resistant Plants and Gardening, and Kathy Jentz with Washington Gardener Magazine, a local gardening hero that we love to work with, teaches that class, and we can certainly set that up. It's certainly one that is important to have. I have found that not a lot is deer resistant. Deers, when they're really hungry for a period of 5 years, if they're finding some other plant, will not eat it. And then all of a sudden they're going to start to come in your yard and eat things that you thought were deer resistant. So I'm very hesitant to give you something that is foolproof. I will say that the onion family, the alliums, do really, really well. That taste in the mouth, that sort of the alliums, the deer don't want. Things that are really feathery and have sort of hairy textures on the leaves, they don't like lavender. I remember marigolds. When I was at Hillwood, we used marigolds a lot in front of the gates because they had a certain sort of scent to them and the texture of the leaves. So beyond that, I don't want to get into that too much, but just think that the texture of the leaves and the taste of some of the flowers really will turn them off, and that there's not a lot of things that are completely immune. I even in the yard, I had some yews that I thought they wouldn't touch a yew, but they started chewing on them. So again, we have another class on that, and we'll be offering that sometime soon for you folks. I see another interesting question of how important would it be to have mulch around these types of plants, and when would you put it down? I don't always believe in mulch, especially that kind of shredded wood fake stuff that's dyed. Obviously, we don't want that. I don't think it looks good in the garden landscape. What I have found is that if you plant your plants really close together, they're going to create a natural barrier against weeds from coming up, because essentially mulch does, well, two things. Some people like to think that it keeps the moisture in and it helps, but oftentimes we find that really thick layers of mulch do the opposite, that it actually does not allow the water to completely come down below it. It almost is a barrier where the water kind of just goes off of it, and so you're not really getting a lot of the water to the plants below or around it. But a good garden design, I believe, is you're planted closer. You're going to plant much closer to each other, so that my plants in the front, I'm starting to plant closer. I'm noticing I don't have to weed as much, and I'm not using mulch at all. So I really wouldn't recommend mulch in general. Just plant closer together, and please do not get that dyed mulch, because that stuff will just leak into the soil, and it's not the best for you. Any other questions for us? What can you place between stepping stones? Sorry, Brooke, I didn't want to cut you off there.
No worries, go ahead.
So what can be placed between stepping stones? It just depends on sun or shade. There is a wonderful brand that a company came out with called Steppables. And if you go to your local nursery, you're going to find these like cute little plants that have the tag that are called Steppables. Those are a lot of these kind of ground cover. Creeping Thyme is a great steppable for, I found it in full sun and partial shade. It smells nice. You can, if you walk on it, it's not going to damage it too much. There are some sedges and some succulents that you can get as well, but I would certainly look at that as well in the nursery. I found steppables are designed for that by the name. So someone else said that Locust Grove website doesn't seem to have a link to the online plant sale. It started last weekend. Does one need to register for the sale? No, one does not need to register for the sale. I would invite everyone to go on to the Montgomery Parks website. Let me quickly make sure that I'm sending you. If you go to montgomeryparks.org, they should on the front page have a link to our plant sales. Let me look for this. We will make sure to send you that link. But if you go to montgomeryparks.org and you do a search for Locust Grove, or you do a search for the plant sales, it should come up, and then you folks can click on that. But it's not too late. You don't have to register at all for the plant sale, and essentially the plant sales are going to go on as long as they have plants in stock. So they might, since it's been going on for about a week, they might have run out of some stuff, but I know that I still think they have some others, just like Brookside Gardens as well. But we'll make sure to email that to you folks. And I believe they're only doing pickups, I think, Friday and Saturday. Brookside Gardens are doing pickups, sorry, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Brookside Gardens are doing pickups Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Want to be respectful of everyone's time. Want to give a heads up. We have some great online courses for you folks, knowing that we need you to stay safe at home, right? And our facilities are closed through the end of June. Going through that, we have conservation landscapes and rain gardens. It's talking about landscape design for rain gardens. The Department of Environmental Protection here at Montgomery County offers a $7,500 credit if you meet certain requirements, and you'll get a check written out to you if you meet these requirements for creating a certain landscape that mitigates stormwater runoff in your backyard. That's being taught Saturday, May 23rd. Winning the War on Weeds is Saturday, June 6th. That's going to be a paid class, and that's with Kathy Gents. Then we have Common Garden Pest and Disease. For those of you who are constantly struggling that a plant goes downhill, this is a great way to talk about how to address that.
We have a free speaker series course called the Chinese Kitchen Garden Beyond Bok Choy. This is being taught by Wendy Kiang Sprang, who's author of the Chinese Kitchen Garden. Then on Saturday, June 6th, we have the Recycled Garden, which is being taught by Marianne Wilburn. She's a wonderful local garden columnist, and she's author of Big Dreams, Small Gardens, which you can purchase online. And then we have Care and Handling of Butterflies, being taught by Kathy Stevens, who is our Brookside Gardens Conservatory Manager. She's someone who manages the Wings of Fancy Butterfly exhibit, and she's an expert in butterflies. And we're going to be doing some really fun sort of live video feed from the show and of butterflies and teaching you how to kind of take care of them in your own backyard. So stay tuned. We are innovating for you folks and trying to bring some really interesting new programming online. I really appreciate you all spending your Saturday morning with me. I hope you enjoyed this Brookside Gardens virtual lecture. Please note that we'll be emailing you either Monday or Tuesday a list of the plant combinations, along, of course, with the upcoming online courses that you can register through Active Montgomery. We're going to go ahead and make sure that you have a link to the online plant sales as well. And also, please note an online short survey. This is the first time that Brookside Gardens has been offering a course online. We want to know, was it too long? What was interesting? What could be improved upon for next time? So please just take 5 minutes for that. I also want to call out that our visitor center and our conservatory, basically our facilities and bathrooms, are closed at Brookside Gardens through June the 30th. However, our parking lots are open, and we want you folks to come out and enjoy the 50 acres of our gardens. Thank you so much for being here with me today. We hope that you and your loved ones stay healthy and safe, and happy gardening. Take care.